Hi there, very good evening. Welcome back again to these advanced research methods. Last week we had a look at the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative research methodologies. When you do researches, you may either follow one of those or otherwise you can follow the combination of both. There are ways to do that. We discussed it last time. And tonight we have the session which is the time horizon. When I say time horizon, it is about the attachment you have with a problem when you study it. It is about the attachment you have with the problem when you study it. So let me explain that using a few examples in here. Let me take these examples first. Now, let's say you have to buy some onion from the shop. You have to pay some money, you have to purchase it. That is one problem. So when you go to the market, there are so many onions in the shop, or so many shops, they have different onions, or in one shop, there are different varieties of onion. So if you want to buy 1 kilo of it or some of it for your cooking, and you need to now do a test on the quality of the onion. We do that. And what we do, we pick one or two of them, or maybe some of them, or maybe you choose those. If you want to buy a smaller amount, maybe 1 kilo, you test every onion and you make it, you select it one by one. Right? If it is a bigger one, if it is a bigger purchase, if you want to buy 20 kilos of bags into 5 or 6 or 10, then you don't test every single onion. You test some of the bags. That is what sampling is about. We would be touching sampling in the next session, next Sunday. But what I say is a testing method. So you just take one onion and you press it and you look around and you test it. If you are okay with it, if you're happy with it, you buy it. If not, you reject it and you go to the next bag or next shop to have a look. So that is when you want to buy that onion from the shop. Now, on the other context, you have a different problem this time. You have some onion in your kitchen already you purchased. Now the test is different here. You're going to cook it. When you're cooking, when you pick it to chop it, to cook it, you may feel that the onion is so soggy, so liquidy. So now you need to make sure these onions are healthy enough to cook. So you have to test here again as well. So earlier in the shop, you wanted to purchase it. So the problem was whether can I purchase this? That was the question. Now in the kitchen, once it is purchased, your question is whether can I cook this onion? So now when you want to do this test in the kitchen, you don't pick the onion and you just, you don't press it and check it. What you do, you cut and check. You cut maybe in the middle or maybe side by side or maybe little by little, and you go inside the onion and you check whether is it the right onion, is it okay to cook it. Now, my point is, when you wanted to buy the onion, you had a test. And when you wanted to cook the onion, you had a different test. Now, the relationship you have in between these two different research problems, when you do the research for those, you have different approach. Earlier, the shopkeeper doesn't allow you to cut the onion to test if it is okay to buy, and you never cut it, by the way. And in the kitchen, you don't do that same kind of test here, because if you do the same kind of test, you would reject every single onion because the outer layers of the onions are soggy. It is not in good condition. So you would reject all of this, but I don't think you can afford to reject those. What you do, you cut it, you peel the first few layers of the onion and you find out the better one inside and you use that to test it, to cook. So what I say is this, when you do this test in the shop is what I'm calling cross-sectional. You look at the surface of it. You just look at it on the surface, outside of it. You don't go inside the problem, you stay outside. If it is okay, you take it. If you don't get the answer, okay, then you reject it. But you can't do that kind of test here in the onions case in your kitchen, where you have to do the longitudinal test, meaning you have to go inside the problem. That is what I'm calling, you peel the skins off. You study the first surface. If it is not answering you enough, you peel the first layer, second layer, third layer, and in the layers, you go inside. until you get some understanding, the genuine understanding, the stronger understanding, you still go further. That is what this longitudinal is about. So purchasing onion in the shop is about the cross-sectional test you do. Checking the onion to cook in your kitchen is what the longitudinal test you do. Now let me take a different example this time. Now, when you want to buy a jackfruit in the market, you have a way. You don't cut the jackfruit the way it is cut in this picture. You have a smaller cut. You just use your sharper nosed knife, and you take a portion, smaller portion of that, and you pull that piece out and you check it. If it is okay, you buy it. Otherwise, sometimes you take a sharp metal piece and you inject that into the jackfruit and take it out and you smell that and you test it. If it is smelling good, you buy it. If not, you reject it. That's a test you do. But if you have already purchased the jackfruit, if it is at home, you have to cut like this to test if it is okay to eat. Okay, because you have already purchased. Two different types of problem in here: purchasing the jackfruit to eat and testing the purchased jackfruit to eat. Two different questions. Now, the earlier one, to purchase the jackfruit, is what I'm calling cross-sectional, because you just have a look at the surface of it, on top of it. And after it is purchased, what you do is a longitudinal. You go inside, cut it, and do a research on that, and eat and see sometimes, and you find out whether is it right or not. Now, let me take another example here. I brought in a picture of a patient with a nurse in a bed. Now, certain diseases you have, if you reach your doctor, he would treat you at the outpatient's door, where he just do some tests using his stethoscope, maybe some observations in your temperature, the temperature test. Maybe he asks you questions about the symptoms and all the complaints you have. Based on those, he would prescribe some medicine because the problem is milder sometimes. Sometimes when you make some big complicated complaint to the doctor would say, I'm also confused. I want to do some research in your body so that I would get you admitted in the hospital. So you have to stay there for 2-3 days to do some observation. After the observation, only the doctor would make a decision and understand the problem of it. So he would start the treatment after 2 or 3 days. So that is what we call the longitudinal. If you get the medicine at the outpatient's door, that is the cross-sectional analysis, because the problem is minor. And if the problem is severe, the doctor will do some longitudinal, because the doctor would live with you for 3 days. He would appoint some nurses instead of him, maybe, but they live with you for 3 days. They live with the problem for 3 days and they study you. That is what we call longitudinal. Let me take another example in here. Do you know the marriages we do in Asian countries, in India, in Sri Lanka, the countries like this? We do some surface test before we find out the match, the suitability of these two people to put them together in the same bed and board. We do this cross-sectional analysis. What we do some reference from the Facebook of those guys. We get some reference from the workplace. We get some reference from the neighbors, friends, classmates, lecturers of those guys. Maybe you get some reference from this numerologist and astrologist and so on. We get these kind of things. And then finally we find out, yes. Or otherwise, these guys, when they meet together in the workplace or maybe in the university, they do some surface test and then find out, I'm for you, you are for me. They decide we are the right couple here. There is no couple like us in the past, and there is no one going to be like us, and they decide. And they tie the knot. And what happens next week after they file the case to divorce, because the test has given the wrong decision, because they have done the cross-sectional analysis. They just seen the skin of the personnel, and the skin, the beauty is the skin deep. Anyway, we know that. So the skin is looking beautiful and you make a decision, yes, let's go ahead with. That is what we call the cross-sectional. And on the other side, the English weddings, I'm calling the Western, the European weddings are not like this. They go for longitudinal, they call it cohabiting, I don't know. So what they do, they call them boyfriend and the girlfriend. They live together for 5 years, 10 years to test whether this is going to work for the rest of the life. And they find out yes or no. At the end of 10 years of test, they would find out, no, this is not going to work for them. So that what they do, they say, it's okay, it's not going to work. And thanks to each other, because we live together for 10 years and we'll go away from each other. And they go for another test. This is what I'm calling the longitudinal. The Sri Lankan weddings are cross-sectional, and again, there are concerns. I mean, you know, I'm just taking an example in here. I'm not hurting anyone. Example, the culture here is to go for cross-sectional, and the English weddings are into the longitudinal. Now, the same message applies to you when you do a research. These are all researchers anyway, minor researchers. But when you want to do a research for your organization of why these employees are leaving, or why the customers are not coming back, why these customers are switching, why this market is declining, why this product is failing in the market, why these customers are complaining, why these customers are not happy about. If you have such problems, what you do is the cross-sectional sometimes you do a longitudinal research. A cross-sectional research to find out why these employees are leaving is about asking the employees why you guys are leaving. So it's a cross-sectional just to speak to the people and see why they are leaving. That is cross-sectional. And the longitudinal approach to understand why these employees are leaving is about you go to the workplace, you stay in the floor, and you live with the workers for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 months. Then you study the behavior of these people, then you get an understanding of it. That is what I'm calling longitudinal. You go very closer to the problem and you live inside the problem is what I'm calling longitudinal. And you just study that from the surface, which is the cross-sectional. You study a problem from the gate is cross-sectional. You study the problem entering into the house and study. That is what I'm calling longitudinal. So depending on your requirement, depending on the severeness of the problem, we have to decide whether to go for a cross-sectional or longitudinal. Now, when this COVID came in earlier, the earlier studies was longitudinal because all this medical world was confused about what this disease is, what this viral fever is about or was about. So they had to admit the personnel, and no doctor knew that was so infectious and that was a killer disease. And they also died while they were living with the problem. Initially, nobody knew. And finally, they found out this is how it is. And then now, after that also, they took some safety measures, safety kits and all these things, and they treated the patients and they learned the problem. Now, these days, we are studying cross-sectional because we know it's severe and it is dangerous, it is deadly. So we are doing cross-sectional. The reason is because deadly, we can't go into the problem. That is one reason. The second reason is too many problems to study. So we don't have a capacity to study every single one in longitudinal terms. So we go for cross-sectional. So my message is this: when you have a problem, doesn't matter if it is into medical, business, family, or whatever the problem, depending on the severeness of the problem and depending on your affordability, because longitudinal studies are expensive. Buying a jackfruit, just having a test on that one, if you don't like it, you can reject it. So it is okay, cross-sectional. But if you have already bought it, you just test it using a sharp-nosed knife, and you do a test and you reject the jackfruit you can't afford. So depending on the affordability, time you have, the money you have, you may decide whether to go for this cross-sectional or longitudinal. My final message on this is this: the cross-sectional is done for master's level and bachelor's level below. Master's and below level studies, we do cross-sectional because we don't do any theory developments. We do theory testing. We test hypotheses. That's all we do. So cross-sectional would be enough. But to develop a new theory in a PhD level, above masters, not masters, above masters, if you want to do that, your research has to be a longitudinal one. You have to stay with the problem. That is why universities allow you at least 3 years, minimum 3 years. You have to stay with the problem and get some theory developed and come out. So we give you the doctoral title. So cross-sectional and longitudinal, that is about it. When you have your research problem in hand, I may be able to consult you which approach, which time horizon you should be into to solve that problem. I think that is it from me on this time horizon. Thank you very much for joining me. Be safe, stay home. Good night. Thank you.